So all the metric for Bitcoin adoption are absolutely off the charts right now. And it's because of the psychological phenomenon of people realizing that they were kind of standing in a building built on sand, and they're starting to realize that that's crumbling. Where else can we go to have a little bit more of a sturdy foundation?
So Brian DeMint, thanks for coming on. You're the author of Bitcoin Evangelism, of which I am quite the evangelist now. Like I said, I've read it twice. I super enjoyed all the tenets of Bitcoin, all the things that matter as sort of someone that's not coming from a financial background. Congratulations on it, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it, man. Now, you just told me offline that you read it twice, and there's little things like that when somebody says it to me. I don't know if you recognize ahead of time like how much that means to an author, but it really does. Like that stuff is like really impresses upon you, because it's hard enough to get people to read a book one time. It's hard enough to get somebody to read an article. Like how many of your friends have sent you an article and it's just like TLDR, I don't have time to read this. Right. So the fact that you took the time to read, hundreds of pages multiple times is very inspiring. So thank you. I appreciate that, man.
Yeah. I think distilling, like I had a friend ask me, he knows I'm into Bitcoin. He's like, so if you could just tell me what it is in 2 minutes. I'm like, I can't. It's like it would do a disservice. It would just confuse everyone if I tried to do that. But the book really states, basic, like what you need to understand about Bitcoin, the financial system, what we're getting away from, and then I did the same sort of rabbit hole journey. I went into altcoins because like they're going to go to the moon. I did some NFT stuff, and all to come back around to actually, reading Andreas's book and your book, and it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense of what blockchain, why is blockchain important, and then the digital internet money, what's it going to look like. So great job. So I wanted to start, maybe not like I said, I went right into Bitcoin, but I wanted to start with your story. It says in the book that you studied psychology of all things. And I think like the more you kind of go down the rabbit hole, you kind of realize like a lot of it is psychology, and that's how markets work. So maybe take us through your start with your degree, and then it mentioned some businesses. You didn't go into too much detail, but I'd like to know those details of kind of what shaped you into the financial space and that kind of thing.
Thanks, man. Well, yeah, no, there was no intention in being in the financial space when I was going to college. Like I was dating my high school sweetheart. We were going to college. We were both in the psychology program. She wanted to be a teacher and get a credential. I wanted to, I was actually halfway done with my master's in forensic psychology. I wanted to be an FBI agent of all things. That just sounded cool to me. I was super into scary movies and horror movies where they're hunting down, like Silence of the Lambs. They're hunting down these serial killers and stuff. And I realized so I got married right out of college. And so I was doing my master's in forensic psychology. And I was starting to recognize where my young man college mentality of, oh, horror movies are cool. And these sadistic people, like there's this twisted part of my mind that thought that embracing that stuff every day would be awesome for some reason. Like, obviously exacting justice, but like, seeing these atrocious things like wouldn't bother me. It was starting to become very clear that like as a family man, my perspective changed really quickly. Like I still love justice, but yeah, I don't like that. That's a heavy burden that those guys bear. It really is. The guys that do that. And I know, I have friends I train with plenty of cops, detectives. I trained with actually 2 FBI agents. And yeah, that stuff's really, really heavy, man. And so the fact that my degree was in human behavioral psychology lent itself not to the FBI field, but right out of college, my wife and I, we walked into a bank. We had both saved up. We both worked full time through college, saved up money for a down payment on a house. But this was 2008, and the bank literally laughed us out of the bank. That was the first time I ever had like a negative reaction from a bank, where it was so. And thank God that they didn't give me a loan. But I remember being really pissed off at the time. Like, how dare you? Like, I'm with my wife. I'm trying to feel like a man. Like, we're about to walk in. Like, give me a loan for a house. I remember a few years before, my brother, he's 6 years older than me, and so he was a little bit ahead of the curve, from where I was at. he got this beautiful big house. And I remember him telling me he just wrote down on a piece of paper how much money he made. So I thought this is going to be so easy. And I wasn't planning to lie or anything like that. I was just planning to tell the truth. And like, this is going to be easy to get a house. No, the banker literally laughed at us, and we walked out. And so we said, well, what are we going to do? We've saved up all this money. Nobody wants to lend us money for a house. And like, we're just newly married. You know, we're not ready to start our careers yet. So we're going to be in the school phase. And so we decided, like, let's start a business. And so we looked at different options. We looked at Subway franchises and you know, just different like mom and pop types of things. And we landed on, of all things, this opportunity presented itself. We opened a tanning salon, which was like super out of character. I'd never been to one. My wife, she would do them before vacations and stuff. And so we, just because this really unique opportunity presented itself, we started in that lane. And one thing led to another. And over the years, like, you know, we started, that was in 2008, the very end of 2008, we started that business. And it's, the company's still in existence, but we've completely changed it, completely refocused and rebranded it. It's actually the hat and shirt I'm wearing now. It's called Salt and Light Wellness. It used to be called Perfect Tan because it was a tanning salon, but now we do light-based therapy. So we even have some components of ultraviolet for vitamin D supplementation, but it's a lot of focus on red light therapy, infrared sauna, cold plunge, salt rooms, those types of things. Because even when we were just a tanning salon, it went from the early years, you were getting like the bacon mom that was wanting to come in and be extra crispy. And it was all about vanity. Right. but then over the years, we were getting more like MMA fighters and motocross guys and professional athletes and hobbyist athletes. Right. You have like the guy that would play racquetball, but he's coming in and like, hey, you know, you don't look super tan. Like, and he's like, yeah, I don't want to be tan. I just want vitamin D. I work inside all day. My doctor says, you know, he gives me these prescriptions for these supplements and my body doesn't synthesize them right. So I need to get actual sunshine, UV treatment. And so it morphed over the years from this like super vanity based business. It was just this weird opportunity we got. So now we're actually the state of California's first full spectrum light therapy studio. So we have a few locations. There's a small chain in Southern California. We're licensing it now. So this thing's grown. We have 4 licensees that are going to be opening up their own Salt and Light locations. And so it's really cool that here we are 15 years in. And because there's this big boom in public awareness and public consciousness of these alternative things, like we've been doing red light therapy for 7-8 years now, but like because of COVID and people recognizing the need for different types of exposure to these different lights, Joe Rogan talks about this stuff now, like all these different guys are talking about it. Yeah. And we're hitting a hockey stick. Like there's just this like massive, I guess, FOMO around people saying, you know what, I need to do these things because they're going to increase my longevity. They're going to increase, you know, my ability to play sports. And, you know, pickleball is huge now. We have like this boom in dudes that are coming in just because they want to, their feet are sore and their knees are sore. And so they're doing infrared saunas to like keep their pickleball game going. But our generation's different than our parents' generation. We're like hobbyist athletes. You and I, we train jiu-jitsu, you know, like that can be a rough sport. There's like lots of tweaks and injuries, and you can never really check your blind spot in your car because your neck's tweaked out, things like that. Yeah. But you get in and you do a little bit of self-maintenance, and, you know, guys that are, you know, I don't know. I feel like we're in our prime still, but maybe we're not in our 25-year-old prime.
For sure.
You know, we got to do a little thing, you know, a little bit of things to keep it in check. So this business has been awesome, and it's been a great opportunity for other types of ministries and stuff like that. It's enabled me to train, like I said, jiu-jitsu. Been training jiu-jitsu specifically. I'd done Muay Thai and stuff before that and some MMA, but got beat up in a couple MMA fights because all I had was striking. And so I decided I fell in love with jiu-jitsu. And I've trained that for the last 10 years. And I like to do that pretty competitively. I'm a black belt now. So that's been a cool journey, man. It's like Bitcoin though. It really is, because getting to any belt, like the first belt is blue belt. And every belt in the system is just like, it's proof of work. It's literally the sport of jiu-jitsu protects itself. I'm about to promote my first blue belt. Like I'm, you know, now that I'm a black belt, I can promote people under me. Mm-hmm. And I'm about to promote my first blue belt. He's been training as a white belt for 3 years. Like I've been seasoning him because you'll have people come along and they're like, oh yeah, my son, he's a black belt also. And he's, 7 years old and he's been training for 18 months in Taekwondo or whatever it happens to be. Taekwondo is an awesome sport, but they don't protect their proof of work system the way that jiu-jitsu does. And that's why there's this incredible overlap between Brazilian jiu-jitsu and these, just even tough sports, people that do CrossFit or working out. And there's just this synergy between that and the Bitcoin community, because we understand what you put in, you get out. And I'll say this too, that for anybody that doesn't train, like the hardest belt to get, this sounds stupid, but it's actually true. Statistically, the hardest belt to get is white belt. More people choose not to train than, like, even if 50% of people fall off before blue belt, it's a lot, like, fewer percentage of the population that ever start to train and even get to white belt. Right. So the fact that it's so difficult to start training, but once you do, it's so easy to keep going. Like you get hooked. You see the value in it and everything that comes along with it. So anyways, this isn't about Brazilian jiu-jitsu, but I think that in some respects it is, and it lends like an ethos to the Bitcoin community. I was on a call. So I run all the marketing for Orange Pill app, and we're the official app of Pacific Bitcoin, which is the biggest West Coast Bitcoin conference this year. It's me and Ben Askren are going to run it's just like a rolling session, but we're calling it a $5 wrench attack self-defense seminar. Like for anybody that's not in Bitcoin, if somebody's going to rob your Bitcoin, we call it a $5 wrench attack. Like they just buy a $5 wrench and they try to hit you with it. So we're doing a $5 wrench attack self-defense seminar at Pacific Bitcoin, because Bitcoiners love to roll. Like it's ingrained into this culture and this population. So anyways, I mean, that's enough to said about jiu-jitsu, but like I said, the business world, the psychology world, that stuff goes together. Let me loop back in the psychology part of it. The understanding business and how people think about products and services is critical. I would have never thought that studying psychology would tee me up to run a business. But it does, because it gets you in the mindset of what do people want. And that's how a free market works. Like a proper economy that's not centrally planned should be based off of where is there a hole in the market, and how can I patch that hole with something that I can provide, whether it's a good or a service. And that's exactly what we were doing. And it was at first, it's something we weren't like super passionate about. There's this like unique opportunity with tanning, and we're like, people need that, and I guess and want that, so we'll fulfill that part of the market. But over time, we saw that there was a trend. The tanning industry was dying, just like we weren't super thrilled to be a part of it. It was just, there was a product market fit, but we saw that for the industry to survive, it needed to morph into something completely different. There was a good component of that industry. The old industry was about vanity and then like burning yourself so you're going to get skin cancer. The new version of the industry was like, hey, there's a right and a wrong way to do things. Like, let's use the good from this industry and tailor it to actually benefiting people and their overall wellness. And then that translates exactly into my time in leading into Bitcoin. It's the psychology of how do markets work? How do people think about money? Do people, and I think the sad answer is most people don't think about money. That was true for me until I started asking questions about Bitcoin. And I'm sure you're the same way. Like, I never asked the question, what is money, until Bitcoin presented me with that question. And now that's how we can start to assess the future of Bitcoin is, what are humans psychologically? How are they going to react to this fact that they're being presented in real time over the last 3 years with this? It's in their face, the idea that fiat currency does not have a cap, that fiat currency can be printed at will just by the press of a button. That is very concerning to a lot of people. And they heard the Fed chairman say that, like, no, we can just, like, don't worry about how long it takes to print money. Because this was like early COVID. People were worried, are you going to be able to print it fast enough? He said, don't worry. We can just push a button and we can just hit a bunch of zeros and we're good. Right. That sounded good in the moment. It appeased their concern. But then the people like 6 months later or a year later were like, wait, I remember when he said that. There's nothing that restricts them from printing more money. Is there a money out there that requires people to do something in order to get it? That's why it leads people to gold. Gold bugs have a really good case right now. Like, it takes energy and effort and work to get gold out of the ground. And it takes energy, effort, and work to create new Bitcoin. And so when you look at the psychological elements, man, people psychologically respond to that in a very, very positive way. That's why we're seeing Bitcoin adoption happening. Even though the price is like, yeah, it's up 100% on the year, we're not seeing it absolutely explode, because the people that are waking up to Bitcoin right now are the guys like you and me that are buying a little bit of, a few sats at a time, easing into this market. The institutions are for sure coming along, but I believe there's been a mass awakening over the last 18 months, even in light of the bear market that's going on, because it's guys that are dollar cost averaging in. They're buying $100 a month, $200 a month, $300 a month. It's not going to make the price shoot to the moon, but you have by far, and you can look at the metrics online, we have the most wallets that we've ever had. We have the most people holding, a full Bitcoin. We have the most people holding, 10,000 pieces of Bitcoin or 10,000 Satoshis. So all the metric for Bitcoin adoption are absolutely off the charts right now. And it's because of the psychological phenomenon of people realizing that they were kind of standing in a building built on sand, and they're starting to realize that that's crumbling. Where else can we go to have a little bit more of a sturdy foundation?
Absolutely. Yeah. So you touched on a little bit the scarcity of, obviously the fiat system, especially the dollar, can be printed at will. And historically, like it says in your book, historically it's all, there aren't any fiat currencies that haven't had the same end, that are in perpetuity, still going. So basically I guess in your book, you mentioned a revelatory moment for you was the scarcity, realizing this. I think it was a Joe Rogan episode or something, like realizing the scarcity of Bitcoin. Talk about that and how that switch sort of went off, and how that sort of started you down this, the Bitcoin digital asset, spectrum.
Yeah. Well,
all right.
What's that? Sorry.
Did I have that? Is that the story, right?
Yeah, that is. No, that's exactly what it was. It was Andreas Antonopoulos, who you mentioned earlier. He was on a Joe Rogan episode, and you just need to hear something like 3 or 4 times or 7 times. In marketing, we think of the rule of 7. You need to present your product to somebody 7 times before it clicks. Like they need some familiarity with it. Mm-hmm. They start to ask some questions about it, but then at a certain point it clicks. For me, this is probably the 7th time or 5th time or whatever that I heard this. But when Andreas Antonopoulos said it, he articulated it so well that it clicked, and I just had been exposed to it before. But this idea of digital scarcity, you hear words like that, and it's easy just to digital scarcity. That's something Bitcoiners say. But the way he said it was, you could never have digital money until Bitcoin. It literally could not exist until something like Bitcoin was created, because in the history of computer science, we always had the ability with digital things to just copy and paste. You could highlight as much as you want, copy and paste it. He even used the example of the music industry. He said, look at what happened when CDs, records, cassette tapes, the analog versions went to MP3. As soon as they went from something that you could control the supply of through production, right, to MP3 digital file, we got Napster and LimeWire and people sharing all these files, and it totally changed the industry. Like to this day, the music industry is still kind of recovering from something that happened 25 years ago, because the business model changed, because it changed how you could access those files, because you could just create them endlessly, right? So if that could happen to music and disrupt that, you could never base your monetary system, your fiat monetary system, on that same type of technology. Because then not only do you have the Fed that can print it at any given moment, you have any single person that could replicate their own money. Who wouldn't do that, right? Sure. And so Bitcoin was the first time. It was the invention was so revolutionary because it's the first time that we could cap something that was digital. It just happened to be money, but we found a way to cap something digital. It also, the way it did it is through this decentralized process. And so you could also say the revolution was this decentralization, which means that no one person's in control of it. But to me, that was like, wow, yes. If you're telling me that this is the instrument which allows digital things to be scarce, then that has to be a precursor for the new monetary system. And so that begs the question, is this going to be the the money that gets adopted by everybody, or is it going to be the next thing that comes after it? And that's why people go down kind of the crypto rabbit hole. And that's a valid question to ask. And you and I have both done that and done our research on that. And hopefully the book leads readers to, it's called Bitcoin Evangelism. So hopefully they understand that like it's a Bitcoin centric book, but it's going to walk people through what these other cryptocurrencies are and what they do, and why they're not going to be like the Facebook disrupting Bitcoin as MySpace. There's plenty of really good arguments to kind of reinforce the fact that Bitcoin is the new gold standard going forward. But anyways, that was just this revolutionary moment where he said this one thing and it just clicked, and it's a simple message. And so somebody might hear it here from you for the first time ever, and it might click for them right away. But for me, it took a few times.
Same. Yeah, same. So you mentioned decentralization. When I feel like when you're talking to someone, or myself at times, not really understanding that how the network works, and how the protocol is sort of integrated. I love how the book talks about the internet protocols, which once they were finalized, everybody kind of got on board, and the network effect just basically just exploded that influence. So maybe talk to me about like first of all, I think the biggest question with Bitcoin is security. I like the scarcity argument, but how do you know it's not going to, from a high level, how do you know it's not going to get hacked? And how does the decentralized nature of it and, the network effect contribute to its security?
So the easiest way I can think of that is that to explain that is the security for Bitcoin is different than the security for, say, like the CIA database or the NSA database. The database for the national security. So all of the United States secrets are in this database that is protected by firewalls. So if you have sophisticated enough in decryption, you can eventually break through their firewall. So they constantly need to update to newer and newer firewalls, newer and newer security. So it's constantly a cat and mouse type of game. People think, well, if Bitcoin's not constantly upgrading its firewalls and it's not building a stronger and stronger wall around it every day, then eventually somebody's going to crack that code. No, it actually takes a completely different approach. What Bitcoin does, the way it derives its security, is by being open source. Most people would think that, if you don't know about computer science, you would think that's a weakness. You just showed me all of your source code, so therefore it's easy for me to hack in and change it. Well, think of it like this. Everybody knows the 10 commandments, or at least we could all go find out the 10 commandments really, really quickly, right? Sure. Like most people probably know them. People might forget one or two. Go hack the 10 commandments right now. Go change the 10 commandments right now. You cannot do that. Why can you not change the 10 commandments? Because everybody knows what they already are. We can go read the open source code of what the 10 commandments are, 1 through 10. It's just a set of rules. It's just a set of things. And so if somebody were to come in along and say, here, look it, I have a book. It has all 11 commandments in it. Somebody added something new to it. Mm-hmm. You would say, well, that's easy to verify that that's not correct because I know what the original 10 commandments are, or I have it written down here. And so that's essentially what open source code is. It's out there in the open. So since everybody knows what it is, you can't change it. Like you look stupid for trying to change it. Right. And that's what makes it so brilliant and so actually difficult to crack, because you really can't.
Yeah, that makes sense. Awesome. Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it, because I feel like most people, that don't know computer science, it's just kind of, they think going into it, unraveling this, story, it's just like, this is going to go over my head. And that was me, until I just kept, listening and reading, and you kind of get this understanding of, how it all fits together. It just makes sense. So,
well, I got to say thank you for asking that question, because I've actually I just made that 10 commandments analogy up on the spot right there. I thought of it as you're asking the question. I think I'm going to have to go back and put that one in the book, because that's better than some of the other things I say. So because I brought it up. You mentioned you're a Christian. I was like, I got to make it like a Christian, use a Christian example here. So I'm going to go with the 10 commandments now. Going forward.
That resonated for sure. All right. So let's see. I don't know if I had any other if you could, it's kind of its own subject, but mining, maybe go through, and all this is in the book, but maybe just abbreviate what mining does and how it further secures. And I like what you said, Charlie Munger's quote of "Show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome." And I like how Sailor will call it like a hornets, like a swarm of hornets, basically, cyber hornets, protecting the network. So how does mining, factor into the security and the network overall?
Yeah. So I like to, when I'm talking to somebody new about this, I like to go back to first principles and just say, okay, let's say Bitcoin doesn't exist, but you want to create a monetary system where people can send money to each other. Well, how do people do it now? We have Visa in between Matt and Brian. So we have a third party that facilitates that. Okay, but we want to take out the third party. How do we have a system where people can send money, but there's nobody in between? There always has to be some mechanism in between, right? Something needs to get it from A to B, but maybe can we figure out a way so that it's not like any individual person? So what we would do is we need to create a monetary system where people can just volunteer their computers to the network in order to process those transactions. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's great. But then, like you said, you have to know the incentives. Well, we need to create some sort of incentive structure. Okay, well, people aren't going to lend their computing power for free. So what we need to do is, if you're going to process those transactions in between Matt and Brian, you are going to get a reward for doing that. There's maybe a transaction fee, but then also just for stacking this information and doing this complex process, we need to reward you for doing that. And so that's exactly what Bitcoin mining is. These computers randomly all over the world work together to solve these, blocks, they're created every 10 minutes, which is just the last 10 minutes worth of transactions all chunked together, and they're chunked in a chain to the block before it, therefore the blockchain, right? And so that's all mining is. It's a group of people that exist out in the world that said, hey, yeah, I'll give my computer to the network to process your transactions. I just want a kickback for doing so. And there's this really sophisticated way that there's checks and balances. They all check each other's work. And because it's not one person, you have, if we're sitting around in a circle of 10 people, and one of the 10 people says, Brian actually gave Matt 100 Bitcoin, but the other 9 people say, well, no, he actually only gave him 1 Bitcoin. There's a consensus there. Like, one person can't feed bad information to the system because you have all these miners that are checking each other's work. I think the quote I use in the book is, if you're trying to send a bad transaction or a fraudulent transaction on the Bitcoin network, it's like trying to rob an old lady's purse inside of a police station. Like, you're doing something under intense scrutiny. You would never do that. You would pick a much more vulnerable target because you're just going to waste your time and energy doing that. So those are kind of the 2 parts. It's like, what are the incentives? Why would people lend their computing power? They would do it to get a reward, and they get a Bitcoin reward for processing transactions. That's precisely why those guys work.
Boom. So talk to me about the block wars. That was a big moment for me that I was like, okay, I'll let you, kind of discuss what they were and why, sure, start your own, go for it kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, so with the block size wars, it was a really interesting time. And it was probably kind of when you were coming around your first time around. I don't know if you were like real into that side of it, though. It sounds like you're more on the trading side of it. But there are multiple versions of Bitcoin. And this is something that as Bitcoiners, we shouldn't shy away from. It's not a weakness of Bitcoin. It's actually a strength of Bitcoin. Most people are familiar that there's like 20,000 cryptocurrencies in the world. I mean, you could argue that all 20,000 of those cryptocurrencies are essentially a version of Bitcoin. Why is that irrelevant? Why does that not matter? And why does that not take away from Bitcoin? Well, the first kind of answer I would give to that is, think of Bitcoin as a language. Like, English is a very, very valuable language. It has all sorts of, if your family speaks English, you can have family connections. If your wife speaks English, you can have a romantic connection. If your business partner speaks English, you can have a business connection. So it provides all of these connections for you. Now, the fact that French or Swahili or some other language exists doesn't doesn't take away from English's value. All the things that you can use English for, it doesn't matter that people speak French in a different country. That's fine. That's the language. Those are the rules for talking that they use. But here we're speaking English because it has value to us and the connections we want to make. Just like Bitcoin. Bitcoin's a language of money. So just, the fact that Bitcoin 2.0 or 3.0 exists doesn't really affect it. It actually literally does not affect the speaking Bitcoin 1.0 as a language. But the block size wars, what that was, it was when the developers and node operators and everybody that was in Bitcoin at the time, it was about 2016, there was an argument over how big remember those 10-minute blocks that we talked about, how many transactions should fit in those. One side of the aisle, the kind of the more conservative crowd, was saying we should keep those block sizes small, because if you keep them small, then more regular people without supercomputers can be nodes. They can essentially contribute to the network by storing all of the transactions. They could be one more backup of the ledger, because there's not these massive sums of memory that would be required for them to do so. But the downside is you would have slower transaction time. So if you're interacting with Bitcoin on the base blockchain layer, the actual Bitcoin blockchain, it could take 10, 20 minutes for you to send a transaction. Or if it's really congested, it could take an hour, 2 hours for you to send a transaction. And so there was other people that said, we should make those blocks bigger, and then we'll be able to process transactions much, much faster. Well, the problem is if you do that, that's what the argument was, it would actually re-centralize Bitcoin to some degree, because only so many people, much, much fewer people would be able to run the Bitcoin blockchain code or house, a node that stores all of the transactions on it. So that was the argument. Do we stay slow but very secure and decentralized, or do we speed up, we centralize a little bit, but we're still kind of decentralized? And that was the argument. Well, what happened was, because there wasn't an agreement, there was a fork. And there was Bitcoin, the main chain, and then there was Bitcoin Cash, which was the one that went with the bigger blocks, and it was slightly faster and those sorts of things. Now it's, that's the beautiful thing about open source code. If you prefer a different set of rules, you can use that new set of rules. Like right now, Matt, you and I, we could create our own language. There's nothing stopping us from doing that. And anytime you and I interact, we can use this new language. Now, I don't know how much value that language has, because we can't use it anywhere else. So that's kind of why it would make sense for us just to go back to English. Like, we should probably just go back to speaking English, even though you and I just created our own language right now. That's essentially what Bitcoin Cash was. And we could say, you know what, there's not enough words in the English language to describe the emotions you feel in jiu-jitsu. We need to create some new words and have a better language that describes jiu-jitsu a little bit better. And you could optimize for certain things, but it's still like, and that's what Bitcoin Cash thought they were doing. They thought they were optimizing for certain things, but at the end of the day, people just don't want to use that. They want the security and the decentralization. The qualities that Bitcoin has is what most people gravitated towards. Now, there's still thousands of people that use Bitcoin Cash, and God bless them. Like, they can do that. That's how open source code works. And that's kind of a free market. It's kind of like this idea of a republic. In the United States, the idea of a republic was, if you live in a part of the country and they change the laws and you don't like them, well, then that's fine. Move to a different part of the country. You did your part, you voted, you did all those things, and they still didn't like you still don't like the laws. You move to a different part of the country. You have the freedom to do that. And so I think some of the problems we saw over the last few years was there was a restriction on people's freedoms to move and voice their opinions and partake in that process. But in open source cryptographic software, digital assets, you do have that freedom. If you like Dogecoin and the properties that Dogecoin has, then go for it. Like, that's fine. You can interact with that. Now, the problem is, most of my Dogecoin friends, they just bought it because they felt like they could get a lot of Dogecoins for a little bit of US dollars. That's probably not a good way to base your monetary system of the future on. The tenets of Bitcoin are a much, much more reliable base for the world's financial system going forward than one of these offshoots of Bitcoin that optimized for something very specific. But like you said earlier, and so anybody listening, they might say, well, we do want Bitcoin to be faster. Like you can't have Bitcoin take 20 minutes to go buy coffee or to go buy a pizza or something like that. That just isn't going to work. Well, the way we optimize the Bitcoin blockchain, the one that I like, is you build extra layers on top of it. And so for fast transactions, we have what's called the Lightning the Lightning network. So I could send 100,000 sats to Matt right now through the computer using QR codes, basically for free, instantly, just using cryptography and mathematics. But that's what's on the back end. I'm just hitting the send button and Matt's receiving it with no intermediaries, nobody giving us permission to send that transaction. So Bitcoin's scaling up, it's being built in layers, and all the problems that Bitcoin's had are kind of going away one by one. As Bitcoin continues to develop, it's harder and harder to make arguments against it as far as, its shortcomings.
Yeah. So that's a question I had. The base layer of Bitcoin is basically the decentralization is a main tenet of the base layer. When you add a layer 2, isn't that centralizing it, like using Lightning Network or Strike or something? Isn't that sort of a central component that you're going to have to trust in? Or how does it, and maybe you can relate that to other blockchains, what they're trying to do? Because, in the book and all we've learned is Bitcoin's the anomaly. And then, you have some of these layer ones that are, trying to provide a product or service, but they have sort of a centralized component to it. How do you decipher, I know you mentioned a couple of times you're not a maximalist, that Bitcoin's the way to go. And I think there might be some value in some of these alternative coins. What are your thoughts on how that all?
I think it's a really good question. I think that people, that it's like, well, in order to speed up transactions, did you have to re-centralize? The Lightning Network has its own way of decentralization, and it's pretty simple. It's just you have more routes. So like if we're video, or are we just audio?
We're video.
Okay. I wanted to make sure, because I'm like, I use my hands for everything.
Yeah.
Okay. So if right here, if I'm trying to send a transaction from A to B, well, there might be a route that just goes directly from A to B. All right. If I only ever use that route, and yes, there's somebody that operates that node that allows that transaction to happen, then yes, that one route, there's a fair degree of centralization. But the fact that I can send through thousands of different routes in order to get from A to B, it's its own version of centralization. So yes, I could take the most direct highway to get from Southern California to Northern California. But if that one highway is closed, I also have 30 different routes I can take in order to get to Northern California. It might take me a little bit longer. It might be a little bit more expensive. And now with the Lightning Network, it's everything's less than a penny. Even if you pay for something, it's virtually free. And so, it's still very, very fast. I mean, it's so fast that even a slower route is like 2 blinks instead of 1 blink. I mean, it's very, very fast. Gotcha. And so that's why there's not a lot of incentive for bad actors to, it's more profitable for nodes to just help the network flow rather than using tyrannical power to say my one node is going to be, very, very authoritarian. Well, nobody's going to use your node, and then it's going to become irrelevant. And guess what? Some other market actor, some other node operator is just going to set up a node to route payments where you would have routed them anyway. So there's this kind of beautiful free market of decentralization that enables even the layer 2 to be very decentralized.
Gotcha. Okay, so talk to me about altcoins real quick. I know we're running out of time. Any other layer ones that might serve, maybe have in the next 5 years that you see, 5 to 10 years that you see some value in, or so where are you set up camp among the altcoins kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that towards the end of the book, I talk about some of the things that altcoins, why they're, even for a Bitcoin maximalist, why they could still say altcoins have some relevance. And it's not because I think you should buy them and hold them. I don't. I think that the people that are running these projects, cool, like develop interesting new technology. And yes, you do need users in order to develop that technology. But anybody that I recommend anything to. I'm just going to not recommend that people I'm recommending aren't going to be the ones that are using your new product.
Right.
But it's very possible that some layer one out there creates something that will eventually probably be built on Bitcoin. There's things that extra layers of Bitcoin may need, like there's smart contract functionality being built on Bitcoin, kind of a more robust version of it on Bitcoin right now, which means it's going to need Oracle protocols, and we can go into what all that stuff is. But there's NFTs on Bitcoin. There's these different components that, and I don't own any NFTs, like non-Bitcoin NFTs or even Bitcoin NFTs. But like those things are being built on Bitcoin, but they were pioneered outside of Bitcoin on Ethereum or other blockchains and things like that. So I think that that's the value that those things provide, is that they're like a research and development arm for Bitcoin. And so I think that things like Chainlink, which is an Oracle protocol, it's something that gathers information. So if you have a smart contract, and I'm not saying go out and buy Chainlink, but I'm just saying this is interesting, and this is something that's probably going to be built on Bitcoin. If Chainlink's smart, then they'll just take their technology and they'll build a protocol. I think that's how they would remain relevant. But if you have a smart contract, and me and Matt, we're betting on the outcome of a baseball game. The Angels are playing the Dodgers. Sorry, I'm a Southern California guy, so it's just a Southern California team. I'm saying the Angels are going to win. Matt says the Dodgers are going to win. We bet and we use a smart contract to place this wager. Well, who gets to determine, who gets to tell the smart contract who won the game, right? Like if Brian gets to tell the smart contract who won the game, then I can just game the system, and I can, even if the Dodgers won, I could still tell the smart contract the Angels won, and I could steal your money. So what an Oracle does is it scrapes information from the internet. So it would aggregate, say, all of the sports websites and all the sports betting websites, and it would come to a consensus. It would say out of 50 sports betting websites, every one of them said the Dodgers won the game. And then it would put that information into the smart contract. The smart contract would then pay out Matt, so that neither one of us, there was essentially a decentralized aggregation of information into the smart contract. I think that's a really interesting tool. I think that that's something that will be needed because smart contracts are being built on top of Bitcoin. We need protocols like that for Bitcoin. And so, yeah, I wouldn't put your money out there, but study those projects and understand what they're doing. And yeah, as they come to Bitcoin, you'll kind of be ahead of the curve. You'll understand what's going on with them. But yeah, I think that that's one of the more interesting ones out there.
Yeah, I think so too. So we're running out of time, but I wanted to end with, you refer to yourself as a bleeding heart capitalist several times in the book. Maybe talk about that and maybe how you got there and what do you think it means?
Yeah, I did a Twitter space one time, and the guy that was interviewing me, he goes, I don't like that you call yourself a bleeding heart capitalist. And I said, oh, why? He goes, because I'm a capitalist. He's like, I'm a libertarian. And this is the right way. Like what we're doing is the right thing. And it's by you changing the definition, you make it sound like there's good capitalists and bad capitalists. But if you follow the tenets of capitalism, which is competition and free markets and things like that, then yeah, capitalists have the high ground. They have the moral high ground because capitalism has lifted people out of poverty and all those things. And I said, you're right. I agree with you 100%, but we live in a culture where definitions of things and terms matter. Like, I don't know where your audience leans on things, but let's say things like Black Lives Matter was a very, very popular movement in the United States. It's come out since that they were like a very corrupt organization and that the founders were just taking money and buying houses and things like that. They weren't doing anything very positive with that money for Black lives, but people contributed to it. Celebrities gave their time and attention and all these things because that phrase, Black Lives Matter, that's why it was so hard in the country to have a discussion about that, because are you going to disagree with this statement, right? If you can state your message in a very clear way and call it something that's like undeniable, it's hard for people to disagree with it. And I think most of the people that hear the term capitalism, there's just a preconceived notion, especially if we're talking to people on the left or on the more liberal leaning side of things. Capitalism is like a bad word to them. But when we can frame it in the sense that no, bleeding heart means I care for the world, right? I want the most good for the most people. Bleeding heart just means that we believe that capitalism, true capitalism, not crony capitalism like we have in this country, where big, powerful countries get to lobby politicians to tailor the rules so that no new competition can enter the market. That's not capitalism. We want true free markets. And so that's how innovation happens. And innovation through capitalism has lifted more people out of destitute poverty than anything in the history of the world. Like, the living standards of the average American are far and above the amenities and the comforts that even the wealthiest person in the world had 200, 300 years ago. I mean, I'm talking about people that aren't rich today, but they have electricity, air conditioning, running water, cold water, hot water, a microwave. They have a car. Like, think about it. There was a time when even the most powerful man on the planet could not get a car. Like, it didn't matter how much he willed it. He could not get a car. Now everybody can get a car, right? And so that's because of innovation and people that created new things. And then because they were able to own their intellectual property, were able to go out and be rewarded for selling it and pushing that market forward. We have, I'm not a big pharma guy, but there's lots of medicines that have been created that have helped extend their lives, or a better understanding of nutrition. Again, I think that there's a lot of problems with factory farming, but in the early 1900s, factory farming, which I have a lot of problems with today, served a purpose in the early 1900s. People were dying then from not having anything to eat. So we needed to figure out a way to industrialize farming, and that was a really good way to feed more people and lift more people out of, okay, now I don't have to worry about how to feed my children so they don't die. I can focus on more productive things that are benefiting more people and therefore lifting everybody in society. That phrase, a rising tide lifts all boats, that's true for an actual capitalist economy. Because when Matt's doing better, and say you're a sales guy and you live in my community, I should be hoping that you close a sale today, because then maybe you're going to come and buy a cold plunge session from me at my wellness studio. Because if you didn't close that sale, you might not have the extra cash to come in and buy that session from me. And then I'm going to go turn around and spend that on marketing, which helps the marketing guy. Again, this true capitalism, by doing things that are in my own best interest, I benefit everybody around me. That's such a Bitcoin ethos type of thing. And that's why I mentioned bleeding heart capitalism throughout the book, is because that's at the core of Bitcoin. Miners, they don't care. I don't need them to care about me. Like, I don't need them to care about Brian Dement or Matt or any of my kids or anything like that. I just need Bitcoin miners to be selfish, to try and get the next block reward, because when they do that, they're actually securing my Bitcoin and they're preserving my family's value by doing the most selfish thing that they can do. That makes for a really good system. And so, yeah, you could say capitalists are selfish people. They just want to sell the most things to the most people. But in a free market, if you're selling things to people, it means you're satisfying a need, and you're paying for labor, and you're paying for these different things that help stimulate the economy around you. And so if we actually care about people, we can say that, yeah, I love people so much that I'm willing to tell them about free markets. I mean, it's a really silly thing. Same thing. I love people enough to tell them about Bitcoin, to tell them about better money. If I walked outside and my neighbor's getting robbed at knife point, I believe, and I think you do too, I have a moral obligation to do something about it. Maybe it's to grab a gun and make sure it stops. Maybe it's to go confront the guy. Maybe it's just to call the police. But I believe I have a moral obligation to do something to stop my neighbor from getting robbed, right? You could say, oh, Brian's a good guy. Or I could just say, I was doing what I was supposed to do, right? Like, I'd feel like less of a man if I didn't at least call the police to help my neighbor. But why, when my neighbor is being stolen and robbed from, he's being robbed through inflation, through an unfair monetary system that's extracting wealth from him, so it's literally stealing from my neighbor, why wouldn't I say anything about that? To me, that's bleeding heart capitalism. It's being willing to say there's something broken, and I know a system that can actually help you get out of this cycle that is robbing you right now. I love you, brother. Let me help you out. I think I have an answer. Check this out. And again, what's the difference between the tyrant that says you need to listen to my way and then the Bitcoin way? In Bitcoin, we're not using coercion. We're just trying to use rational arguments to win you over to our side. The tyrant is saying, you must come over to my side. We're saying, the tyrant thinks he has the truth. We think we have the truth. The difference is we're going to try and win you over with compelling points and rationality. And so I think that, the most selfish thing I can do is make sure my community is as rich as possible. My kids are going to have a better future if my community is really, really rich. So that's my selfish incentive to help other people become wealthier.
Right. That's perfect. I'm glad you touched on the system, that many people just, and me before Bitcoin, that people just accept, oh, inflation's 2%, it's 7%, it's just the way it is. And I'm glad you touched on that, because it's truth. I think speaking truth to someone in so many different ways is compassion, and not the other way around. Well, that sums it up, man. I appreciate your time. That's all I got for you today. Brian DeMint, I'll say again, Bitcoin Evangelism is, out of the dozens and dozens of books that I've read on this subject, it's an outstander for sure. That's why I read it twice. So thanks for that, and thanks for all you do.
All right, man. Appreciate it, Matt.
Take care.